On the 30th of November, 1845, men in top hats fought their way through a doorway in Whitehall, carrying rolls of paper the size of a man's leg. It was the last day to file a railway plan with the Board of Trade, and the office had to stay open into the night. Here is what those rolls of paper were worth. In 1845, £100 in cash could subscribe you to £2,000 of railway shares. The other 1900 was not a discount, it was a debt, payable on demand, and the demand came later. This is the story of the biggest infrastructure bubble of the 19th century. Not a swindle by one man, but a machine, built out of Parliament, printed prospectuses, and installment payments that could not stop authorizing railways even after the market had stopped believing in them. The Parliament that could not say no. Nothing about a British railway was private. You could not lay a single mile of track without an Act of Parliament, because you needed the power to take other people's land. Every line began as a bill, and every bill began as a plan deposited with the Board of Trade. That is why the office in Whitehall was under siege that Sunday night, with cabs and carts unloading in the dark. The volume tells you what happened. In 1844, 37 railway projects received the sanction of the legislature. In 1845, 118 railway bills passed. Those are not estimates from a historian. Those are the numbers Sir Robert Peel, the Prime Minister, read out in the House of Commons on the 23rd of April 1846. In the same speech he described what was coming in that session alone: 519 railway bills, asking on paper for £304 million. And then Peel said the honest thing. It would be, in his words, quite illusory to rely upon that as the amount of capital which would be actually required. Many of those lines were competing for the same route. Parliament was being asked to choose. What it had to choose with was this. In the 1845 session, the House of Commons split the work between 44 separate committees. Every single one of them, without exception, authorized at least one new line. The following year there were 64 committees, and the one body that was supposed to look at the network as a whole, the Railway Department of the Board of Trade, had been abolished in July 1845 after 11 months of existence. Its recommendations had a habit of being ignored. There is a further finding, and it is recent. Two economic historians reconstructed the voting and found that close to a quarter of the railway bills, approved in the 1845 and 1846 sessions, passed because members traded votes with each other. Parliament had already changed its own standing orders so that no member could vote on a company he had a stake in. It made no difference because members could still vote for each other's lines. The companies that got through that way traded at a 31% discount to the rest. £100 down. Now look at how the money worked, because this is the part that explains everything else. Here is a real prospectus from 1845. Capital, £350,000 and 17,500 shares of £20 each. Deposit, £1 per share. You paid a 20th. On the same page, a form to apply for shares, and a list of earls and members of Parliament lending their names to the scheme. That deposit was the whole machine. Parliament had set it at 10% in 1837, cut it to 5% in May 1844, and put it back to 10 in July 1845. The increase, wrote a contemporary chronicler of the crisis, did not in the least repress the ardor of speculators. New company promotions peaked in October and November of 1845, months after the rule was tightened. And the leverage did something to the numbers that almost nobody noticed at the time. At the peak, shares in lines authorized in 1845 traded at 4.36 times the amount actually paid in, over 300%. But convert the same paper into a fully paid share, and the rise is 1.24, about 24%. The mania in the price was mostly the mania in the installments. The market was never valuing these railways insanely. It was valuing a very small down payment. A speculator's handbook published in 1845 explained the appeal without embarrassment. Persons possessing only sufficient capital to pay the deposit, it said, may more than double it in a day. The men who did that had a name. They were called stags. They subscribed, took the allotment, and sold the scrip before the next installment fell due. The satirical papers drew them as footmen and clerks playing at being gentlemen. And this is where the story usually goes wrong. Who actually bought? The legend of the Railway Mania is that it was inflated by the ignorant. Clergymen, widows, servants, people who did not understand what they were buying. Two economic historians went through the subscription lists that Parliament itself published in 1845 and 1846, name by name, with occupations attached. More than 12,000 investors, clergymen and women together, accounted for 1.2% of the capital. The working classes about 0.1%. Here is who actually paid. Merchants, 30% of the capital. Gentlemen, the aristocracy and military officers, 34%. The top 4% of shareholders provided half of all the money, and the top 1% alone provided nearly a third. And when the subscription list for the larger investors was published, the newspapers counted 157 members of Parliament on it. Nearly a quarter of the House of Commons that was voting on these bills. A name on a provisional committee was itself an asset, and there was a market in it. On the 18th of September 1845, a small advertisement appeared in the Times. A gentleman, giving only his initials and a hotel address, offered to allow himself to be advertised as one of a provisional committee, or a director of any railway or other public company, on condition that he was secured a certain number of shares at a premium of not less than 5%, without any risk to himself. The press was part of the machine too, and this is measurable. In 1843, Britain had 2 railway papers. By the end of 1845, there were more than 24, some publishing several times a week, and for a short while, 2 railway dailies. The Railway Times was taking an estimated £14,000 a week in advertising from railway companies. Researchers who digitized every page of it found that advertisements made up over a quarter of its content. The prospectus was not a story in the railway press. The prospectus was the business model. The call. The market turned on the 8th of August 1845, and the thing that makes this bubble different from every other one is what happened next, because nothing stopped. Parliament authorized its record year in 1846, 4,500 miles. Railway spending peaked in 1847, when it took up something close to half of all capital investment in Britain. Prices had been falling for 2 years by then. It did not matter. An act of Parliament was a commitment, and a subscription contract was a debt. So the calls began. In 1847 alone, railway companies called up £42 million from their own shareholders, at a time when the entire tax revenue of the British state was around £58 million. By the 1st of December that year, shareholders had paid in £121 million. Standing over them, still in the authorizations, was another £334 million. The Illustrated London News in October 1847 described what that felt like from underneath. Railway companies, it wrote, were declaring legal war against the shareholders, extorting money from them by a process equivalent to the pincers and thumbscrews of ancient times. If you did not pay a call, you could be sued for it, or your shares could be forfeited. So people sold. The Economist watched the loop close. Every fresh call was met either by selling the shares it was called on, or by selling something else to raise the money. In the worst cases, shares changed hands at negative prices. The seller paid the buyer to take the liability away. Then the whole thing collided with a bad harvest. Wheat doubled in price and then halved again inside 4 months. Corn dealers failed, gold left the country, and the Bank of England's reserve fell from £10 million to 2. On the 25th of October 1847, the Treasury wrote to the bank and told it to lend freely at a rate of not less than 8% and promised to stand behind it if it broke the law that limited its note issue. The letter worked immediately, and the bank never actually had to break the law. The banker Samuel Gurney described the effect. Customers who had demanded their money in the morning sent word that they did not want it after all. 4 days later, the Economist wrote down the problem this created, and it is still with us. From now on, it said, the public would believe that if the pressure were only severe enough and the demands loud enough, any restriction could be suspended. So who paid for all of it? Not the companies. Parliament had quietly capped how much a railway could borrow to a third of its share capital, and only after half the nominal capital had been raised. That single restriction is the main reason British railways, unlike American ones, almost never went bankrupt. The bondholders came out with above-market returns. In Andrew Odlyxko's words, it was just the shareholders who suffered. The losses were on the order of 60 to 80 million pounds, out of around 240 invested. What the paper built. And they had been warned by the arithmetic, if not by anyone else. Take the East Anglian Railway. The plan filed with Parliament promised 87 miles at £8,700 a mile. What actually got built cost £18,300 a mile, more than double. The revenue, 10 years later, was running at 2/3 below the promise. In one large company whose accounts were examined line by line, the routes authorized before 1845 earned 7.5%. Those authorized in 1846 earned 0.07%. What survived is the strange part. Almost none of the track was ever pulled up. The network tripled. Parliament, unable to keep drafting hundreds of private bills from scratch, standardized the clauses instead, and in doing so wrote the skeleton of modern company law in a single year. It fixed the gauge of the railway at 4 foot 8.5 inches, which is now the gauge of most of the world. And in the middle of the mania, it forced every new line to run at least one train a day, each way, with seats and a roof, at no more than a penny a mile, for people who could not otherwise afford to travel. As for the people who paid, we do not know how many were ruined, and we never will. Not because nobody counted, because until 1861, in England and Wales, you could only be declared bankrupt if you were a trader, someone who made his living by buying and selling. A clergyman, a widow, a retired officer holding scrip he could not pay the calls on was not a trader. He was legally incapable of going bankrupt. The ruin of the shareholders does not appear in the statistics, because the law had no category for it. Parliament had absolute power over this. Not 1 mile of track could be laid without its permission. It divided that power between 44 committees, and then 64, each looking only at its own corner of the country, and every one of them said yes. The one body that was meant to look at the whole thing lasted 11 months. Nobody had to lie. It was enough that each of them, separately, was right.